Okay, so we've got some pretty intense writing to dive into here. And it really gives us a really clear picture of what's going on in this person's world. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. It's fascinating how these excerpts give us such a raw and unfiltered look into a very specific perspective on the world.
Exactly. So our goal here is to help you understand what we're seeing in these text excerpts. You
Right.
know, like the key themes, recurring ideas, and all those those complex emotions that are jumping out at us.
Right. And it's important to remember that we're approaching this with sensitivity.
Oh, absolutely.
Some of this material is definitely tough, so our aim is to help you understand what's behind the words without endorsing any particular viewpoint.
Yeah. Just trying to understand.
Exactly. It's about exploring what we can learn from this very unique voice.
Right. And one of the things that jumps out right away is the author's self-identification as having high-functioning autism.
Yeah.
That seems to be a big part of their identity, but it's not a simple relationship, is it?
No, not at all. You know, high-functioning autism is a term that's actually considered outdated now because it doesn't reflect the full spectrum of experiences that people with autism have. But using the language that the author uses, we see this complex mix of pride, frustration, and a sense of feeling isolated.
Yeah, there's one line that really struck me. It says, I got high-functioning autism, and I got all my shots and shit. It's almost defiant, right?
Definitely.
Yeah.
It sounds like a direct pushback against that idea that vaccines cause autism, which unfortunately has been a harmful misconception spread by some people.
Yeah. It's interesting, though, isn't it? Because you'd think someone with autism might be more sympathetic to those concerns.
You might expect that.
Mm-hmm.
But here we see the opposite. There's a lot of anger directed at Jenny McCarthy in the anti-vaccine movement.
Yeah.
It clearly touches a nerve for the author.
Yeah, it does seem to trigger a strong emotional response for sure. And this anger also comes out in relation to their experience with CMH. They say, I think that CMH is a flaming bag of shit due to their motto of no one left behind. That's harsh, isn't it? It sounds like they feel really let down by the system.
Yeah, it definitely points to a feeling of not receiving adequate support.
Mm.
And that feeds directly into that sense of isolation we were talking about.
There's a real sense of disconnect there. And that actually brings us to another major theme that runs through these excerpts. Technology. What's interesting is that the author seems to have this love-hate relationship with it.
You hit the nail on the head. It's
Yeah.
this desire to participate in the digital world, but also a sense of being excluded, even enraged by how technology is everywhere. It's a fascinating contradiction.
Yeah, we see it most clearly in the rants about things like their flip phone. They say flip phones are obsolete like a flameless, flaming bag of shit, and I'm still using one. It's kind of funny, but also sad.
Yeah. It highlights that struggle to keep up in a world that's constantly changing technologically. And it goes beyond just outdated devices, too. There's also frustration with social media, with how intrusive data collection feels, and a sense of being overwhelmed by it all.
It's like they're bombarded with information and technology they can't escape from, but at the same time, there's this desire to use technology for creative purposes. You mentioned wanting to make AI-generated movies.
Yeah.
What does that even entail? I'm not even sure I understand what that means.
Well, it's becoming more accessible, although it still has limitations.
Hmm.
Essentially, you use AI tools to generate visuals, dialogue, even music based on your prompts. You're essentially collaborating with the AI to bring your vision to life.
That sounds fascinating, but I can also see how it could be incredibly frustrating if the technology doesn't quite live up to your expectations, or if it feels like it's taking control away from you as the creator,
Right.
like losing that creative spark.
Yeah, exactly. And that tension between control and creative freedom seems to be at play here.
Yeah, yeah. And speaking of strong feelings and control, we have to address the elephant in the room, right? This phrase, flaming bag of shit, that appears over and over again. That's pretty striking language.
It certainly is. It seems to be the author's go-to phrase for expressing a whole range of negative emotions, from frustration and disgust to pure unadulterated anger.
Yeah, it's almost like a verbal pressure release valve, right? Like, arg, warg, flaming bag of shit.
Exactly.
But what's interesting to me is how wide-ranging the targets of this anger are. It's individuals like Doug Ford and Elon Musk, but also broader concepts like modern society or even the entire justice system. It's like a blanket condemnation of things that are frustrating to them.
That's a great observation.
Yeah.
And when you think about how overwhelming sensory input can be for some individuals with autism, it makes you wonder if this strong negative language is a way of processing those intense feelings. It's like trying to create distance from things that feel chaotic or out of control.
So it's not just about the specific targets, but about a deeper need to exert some kind of control over their environment. even if it's just through language.
Right. It's about labeling things, putting them in a box, and then setting that box on fire, so to speak. But this need for control also seems to play out in a more nuanced way when it comes to social connections. There's definitely a lot of anger and frustration expressed, but beneath that, you see a real yearning for connection, for a sense of belonging.
Yeah, that comes through pretty strongly. They talk about wanting to find love, about frustration with their mother's emotional distance, and even about trying to find friends online. It's like this push and pull between wanting to connect and pushing people away at the same time.
It's almost as if the anger and negativity are a defense mechanism, a way of protecting themselves from the vulnerability of putting themselves out there and potentially being rejected.
Like a wall they've built up.
Aaron.
But it also seems like they're trying to find cracks in that wall, ways to let people in.
It's a really complex dynamic. And it makes you wonder if this desire for connection, this need to be seen and understood, that might actually be one of the driving forces behind all of this writing.
It's like they're trying to find their voice, to figure out how to make themselves heard in a world that often feels overwhelming and confusing.
And that search for a voice also seems to be tied to their creative ambitions. They've mentioned wanting to make movies, to become a successful YouTuber, to achieve recognition for their work.
Yeah, let's talk about those ambitions, because they seem to play a big role in how they see themselves and their place in the world.
Yeah, it's fascinating how those creative aspirations seem so intertwined with this longing for connection and this desire to make a mark on the world. It's like they're seeking this validation,
Yeah.
like proof that they matter, that their voice deserves to be heard on this grand scale.
You mentioned wanting Oscars, Grammys, even a Red Diamond Creator Award on YouTube. I mean, those are some pretty big ambitions.
They certainly are. And it speaks to a desire not just for recognition, but for validation. It's like they're looking for proof that they matter, that their voice deserves to be heard on a large scale.
But there's also frustration with the perceived lack of that recognition, right?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
There's this sense of injustice, like the system is rigged against them. And this ties back to that feeling of powerlessness we were talking about earlier. It's like they're constantly bumping up against obstacles and feeling like they're not being given a fair shot.
It's interesting that they specifically call out Mr. Boss FTW, a YouTuber who makes videos about Grand Theft Auto. They seem quite annoyed by his content. What is it about his content that bothers them so much?
It seems like it's this frustration with hype and sensationalism content that they perceive as lacking substance. They're looking for authenticity, something real and meaningful. And it seems like they're not finding that in the mainstream YouTube world.
So it's not just about fame itself, but about the kind of fame they're seeking. It has to be earned. It has to be based on something they believe in, something with integrity.
Right. Precisely. And this seems to be a recurring theme in their writing. They have this strong moral compass, a sense of what's right and wrong. We see it in their anger towards people who park illegally in handicap spots, for example.
Yeah, they say, I think that people who illegally park in a handicap spot without a permit are a flaming bag of shit. They think they're right to bark at someone to move their car, even if that person truly is disabled. There's a real sense of outrage there.
Absolutely. It's like they feel that people are taking advantage of a system that's designed to protect those who are vulnerable.
And the sense of justice, this desire for fairness, it extends beyond just personal experiences, too.
Right.
They also express some strong opinions about social issues like homelessness and drug addiction.
Yeah, they're critical of Doug Ford's policies, arguing that he's not doing enough to address the root causes of these problems.
So there is a deeper level of empathy there, a concern for those who are struggling, even though it might not always come across that way.
Yeah, that's an interesting point, because on the surface, a lot of their writing comes across as very angry and cynical. But when you look closer, there's this real concern for social justice, this desire to see a more equitable world.
Right. It's like they're using that anger to point out the flaws in the system, to challenge the status quo. But there's also a personal vulnerability that comes through, especially when they talk about their experience at the Eaton Center.
Yeah. They describe being questioned by a man who assumed they were bothering a woman they were standing near. They write, "The world just assumed that if I'm standing near a lady and notice that I'm off due to my autism, they think that I'm a creep that would rape her." That's a heavy experience to carry.
It is. It speaks to this deep-seated fear of being misjudged, of being seen as a threat simply because of their autism. And it's a fear that many individuals on the spectrum experience. And it can have a profound impact on how they interact with the world. It seems to fuel that preemptive defensiveness we talked about earlier, that tendency to lash out with those flaming bag of shit rants. It's like they're trying to push people away before they even have a chance to reject them.
Exactly. It's a way of creating distance, of protecting themselves from potential hurt.
Yeah.
But it also creates this barrier to forming genuine connections, which is something that they clearly crave.
A vicious cycle.
Yeah.
The fear of rejection leads to behaviors that make rejection more likely, which then just reinforces the fear.
Right. Exactly. And it highlights the need for greater understanding and acceptance of neurodiversity, for creating spaces where people with autism feel safe to be themselves without that fear of judgment.
And a big part of that is listening to their voices, even when those voices express anger or frustration, because behind that anger, there's often a deeper story.
Absolutely. A story of pain, isolation, and this longing for connection.
You also express concerns about how companies like Google and Facebook collect and use your data. Like, Google knows way too much about me. It's convenient sometimes, sure, but it also feels creepy, like I'm constantly being watched.
It seems like they're wrestling with the tension between the convenience and the intrusiveness of technology, which is a dilemma I think a lot of people are facing today.
Right. Like, you want the benefits, but you don't want to give up your privacy. It's a tough balance.
It is. It touches on the broader issue of privacy in the digital age. You know, this feeling that your personal information is being used and manipulated without your consent.
And it connects back to that desire for control. They want to have agency over their own life, their own data, their own identity. But in a world where technology is increasingly pervasive, that can feel like a really uphill battle.
Absolutely. And it raises some important questions about how we can navigate the digital world in a way that feels safe and empowering.
Yeah, for sure. But it's not just about technology. They also express a lot of anger and resentment towards their parents, particularly their mother. They even talk about wanting to harm them, which is obviously a very serious and concerning statement.
It is. And it's important to take any expression of violence seriously. But it also speaks to this deep level of hurt and frustration within the family dynamic.
Mm-hmm.
It sounds like they feel profoundly misunderstood and trapped in this situation that just feels unbearable.
They write, I'm so goddamn motherfucking sick and fucking tired of my freaking parents. I'm so close to getting a knife and stabbing them. They're the main problem why I'm so mad about the world.
Wow. There's a lot of pain in those words. It's like they're blaming their parents for everything that's wrong in their life, as if they're the source of all their anger and frustration.
But it also seems like they're projecting their own feelings of powerlessness onto them. It's as if they're saying, if I could just get rid of them, then everything would be okay.
Right. It's a way of trying to regain a sense of control in a situation where they feel completely out of control.
Mm-hmm.
But it's a dangerous coping mechanism.
Mm-hmm.
And it highlights the need for healthy ways to process those intense emotions.
Absolutely. You know, they also talk about feeling limited by their autism, like it's a barrier to living the life they want to live. They say, I'm basically disabled as I have high-functioning autism. I don't personally drive, but I think with my autism, I should get a handicap permit if I ever drive. There's a real sense of almost like they're trying to reclaim their disability, to define it on their own terms.
Yeah. But there's also a sense of resentment, like they're being held back by something that's outside of their control.
It speaks to the societal stigma surrounding autism, the way it's often seen as a deficit rather than a different way of being.
Yeah.
And they're pushing back against that, trying to assert their own agency.
It's a reminder that people with autism are individuals with their own unique strengths and challenges, and they deserve to be treated with respect and dignity, not defined by their diagnosis.
It's about recognizing neurodiversity as a valuable part of the human experience, not something to be feared or pitied. And their writing, despite its harshness, is actually helping us to do that. It's giving us a glimpse into a world that we might not otherwise understand.
It's challenging us to confront our own assumptions and biases, to see the world through a different lens. And ultimately, that can lead to greater empathy and compassion.
Absolutely. We've talked a lot about their anger and frustration, but there's also a playful side to their writing, right?
Yeah.
This dark sense of humor that comes through at times. They make some pretty provocative jokes about public figures, particularly politicians.
Yeah, humor can be a powerful coping mechanism, a way of dealing with difficult emotions and challenging authority.
For example, they called Doug Ford a fat fuck and say they bet that Doug smokes crack, like his brother, the late Rob Ford. It's pretty harsh.
Mm-hmm.
But there's also a kind of a rebelliousness there.
Right. Yeah, a refusal to be intimidated by those in power. It's like they're using humor to bring them down to their level, to expose their flaws and make them seem less formidable.
It's a way of taking back some of that power, of asserting their own voice in a world that often feels oppressive.
And it's not limited to Canadian politicians either.
Yeah.
They also have some strong words for Joe Biden, calling him a walking embarrassment, among other things.
There's a pattern here of targeting figures of authority, people who represent the establishment, the status quo.
It speaks to this deep-seated mistrust of institutions, this feeling that they are not serving their needs or representing their interests.
And it's not just politicians. They also direct their ire at certain celebrities, particularly Logan Paul. Why Logan Paul? What is it about him that bothers them?
Logan Paul seems to represent everything they despise about the modern world. The superficiality, the obsession with fame, the lack of substance.
They even compare themselves to him, saying, Logan Paul is a Kevin Stewart wannabe, and I don't like it. What do you make of that? It's almost a backhanded compliment.
Right. Yeah, there's this fascinating mix of admiration and resentment there.
Mm-hmm.
They recognize his success, but they also see him as this symbol of everything that's wrong with the system.
It's like they're saying, I could do better than that if only I had the opportunity.
There's a sense of competition, but also this longing for acceptance and validation. It's as if they're saying, I want to be recognized, but I want to be recognized for something real, something meaningful.
It all circles back to that search for authenticity, for a sense of purpose and belonging in a world that often feels shallow and meaningless.
And their writing, despite its flaws and its harsh edges, is a testament to that search.
Yes.
This raw and unfiltered expression of their experiences, their frustrations, and their hopes.
It's a voice that deserves to be heard.
It's interesting how these feelings of frustration and this desire for recognition play out in their views on other cultures. Like they express some pretty strong opinions, even some racist views, but there's also this fascination with certain cultures, specifically Japanese culture, that seems to be about more than just a surface level attraction.
Right. It's not just like they think Japanese food is cool or something. It seems deeper than that.
Exactly. And it's something we need to approach with sensitivity because there are some deeply problematic views expressed. But what's fascinating is how their interest in Japanese culture seems to be intertwined with this yearning for connection and belonging that we've been talking about.
It's like they're projecting an idealized image onto that culture, a vision of a place where they might be accepted and understood in a way that they don't feel here.
Yeah, like they're searching for a place where they can fit in, where the differences might be celebrated rather than stigmatized, which is really sad when you think about it. Like they have to look to a whole other culture to feel that way.
It's a powerful reminder that prejudice and attraction can coexist in complex and often contradictory ways.
Yeah, and it highlights the need for ongoing self-reflection when it comes to our own biases.
Right.
Like we all have these assumptions and biases about other cultures, and it's important to be aware of them and to challenge them.
Okay, so another theme that comes up in their writing is this preoccupation with power and control. They describe some pretty intense fantasies involving violence and domination. They even mention things like mass shootings and bombings, which is obviously very disturbing.
It is. And it's important to emphasize that there's no indication that they intend to act on these fantasies. But they do raise concerns about their emotional state and the way they're coping with those feelings of powerlessness that we've been talking about.
It's like they're trying to regain a sense of control in a world that feels very chaotic and unpredictable.
Right. And it's important to recognize that these harmful attitudes and fantasies need to be addressed. It's not about condoning them, but about understanding where they come from and finding healthier ways to cope with those underlying feelings.
Yeah. They also seem to have difficulty distinguishing between fantasy and reality at times, especially when it comes to their online activity. For example, they claim that Taylor Swift owes them money because their tweet about a stabbing attack at her concert caused them mental distress.
Right. It's like that blurring between the online world and reality that we see more and more these days. And it can be especially challenging for individuals who might already be struggling with social cues and boundaries. It highlights the need for developing those critical thinking skills and a healthy skepticism about what we encounter online. Like not everything you read on the internet is true.
For sure. Okay, so there's also this recurring theme of distrust towards authority figures, particularly those in positions of power. There's a lot of anger and cynicism toward politicians, law enforcement officials, even mental health professionals. Like, they don't trust anyone in a position of authority.
And that's understandable, given their experiences with systems that have often failed them.
Mm-hmm.
It's a reminder that those in positions of power need to be held accountable and work to build trust with the communities they serve. It's not just about wielding power. It's about using that power responsibly.
So, to wrap things up, it's clear that this person is struggling with a lot of complex emotions and challenging experiences, but their writing, despite its rawness and its sometimes disturbing content, offers a valuable glimpse into a mind that's grappling with these really big issues of identity, belonging, and the challenges of living in a world that often feels hostile and uncaring.
Yeah, it's a voice that deserves to be heard, not because we agree with everything they say, but because it forces us to confront some uncomfortable truths about ourselves and our society. It challenges us to look beyond the anger and to see the vulnerable human being beneath the surface.
It's a reminder that even the most challenging voices can teach us something important about the human condition, if we're willing to listen.
Exactly. It's about empathy, about understanding, and ultimately that's what this deep dive has been all about.
Absolutely. Thanks for listening.